So, Flo, I want to ask you a question about Oldguard. You mentioned it earlier, and it's something that I hear horror stories about, but then I also, on the other hand, hear stories about how awesome it was and how pure and how amazing it was. So, was Oldguard as bad as I have heard stories of? And was it as good that I have heard stories of? Where does it fall?
The answer to both of those questions is yes. People are just people. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, people are always going to be just people. And Amtgard, like every other organization, had people that were not very good people, that did not very good things, and had people that were good people that did not very good things. But that's not the majority of people. The majority of people aren't monsters. The majority of people are people that are just trying to do what they think is the best and the most fun in the moment. And sometimes those ideas conflict. So the short answer to my question on what was Oldguard like, there's always been an Oldguard, and the Oldguard was always the guard that was slightly older than you are. And they were always crotchety and, playing not letting you play your music loud enough and, and things like that. I grew up in an Amtgard where, on the battlefield, and I'm not talking about ditching. I battle gamed a lot. You were not considered good just because of your ability to win tournaments, because tournaments weren't the only way towards getting Sword Knight. You could get your Weapon Master and your Defender, which was, you had to have 2 of the 3 to get your sword at that point. And maybe you never want to become a warlord. You just want to be a Sword Knight. Some kingdoms allowed Master Griffin. So this was honor and chivalry on the battlefield. And I've talked about it quite a few times on the on the WAC podcast, but Sir Shadow, I'm 99% sure was knighted off of Griffins originally. I think that he earned later. He may have become a warlord later or gotten other accolades later, but also one of the coolest people that I've ever known. Great Amtgarder.
You talk about the best sword knight, one of the best sword knights in the entire game for my money when it comes to influence over the game, teaching skills, pinnacle of what I want a sword knight to be. Not a warlord, Sir Delos.
Yeah, absolutely. Delos is a great example. He never wanted to be a warlord. He wanted to teach, and that was his goal, and he worked towards it and he got it. So you couldn't just be like, if you were good on the battlefield, if you had to be good at battle gaming. These companies that people talk about in Legend, the Green Dragons and the Justicars and the Triads and the Rogues and the Torches, and all of these groups would go to Banner Wars and compete. And these were massive company-wide battles, where you were getting a master class in how to play battle games and do tactics and do things like that from all of these people. Now, I've been focusing on the fighting part of it right now because that's was one of my first loves in the game. But as we mentioned earlier, that's not my only love. You also had people that were working towards what we now know as AIBOD. There were different revisions of that before that didn't have as much power. We had the Inter-Kingdom Rules Committee, where we had finally decided to come together as a game and standardize rules and answer all of these, instead of it being like the situation that I described before, where maybe you write to your king or send off to Burning Lands to see what a rules clarification is. Now you have a board that is standardizing it everywhere. So if I go out to Iron Mountains, which for me is a 1,800 mile trip, I know that I'm going to be playing the same Amtgard. They don't have a slight rules variation from my kingdom, because that was a thing that we really had to do. You looked up what the rules variations were for the kingdom that you were going to. In this land, the way that this is interpreted, assassins have pro mag. What?
Is that also maybe the difference between the shot in motion and atomic clock stuff? I've heard that a little bit, but I'm not super familiar with that.
So there were kingdoms that played shot in motion at the time, and there were kingdoms that were atomic clock. Our kingdom was atomic clock because Falling Fire and Neverwinter were atomic clock, and the Wetlands and a lot of those other kingdoms were atomic clock as well. And the way that atomic clock worked was, if I touched you first, I won. Think of it like Obi-Wan Kenobi. As soon as I touched you with a lightsaber, you disappeared. So if I stabbed you, even if your shot would have otherwise been in time by the rules that we understand them now, I won. This promoted people that had the most fast twitch muscles to be some of your best fighters. This is straying off of the question of what was Oldguard like, though, and I want to and moving into fight theory. The bad you said, was it good or bad? Was it bad? Yes, there were some really bad parts of it. There was probably quite a bit of discrimination, especially if we were to compare it to the world that we live in now, which might not be a fair comparison, right? As much as I don't want to use this analogy, there is some credibility to saying, well, that was the time that Grandpa grew up in, right? But I think it's fair to say that there was a greater level of discrimination on all levels back then than there is now. We have been working very hard to be much more inclusive. Attitudes were worse. Amtgard was ruled by, it was a might makes right scenario. I just happen to be friends with a lot of the mighty. But I also acknowledge that there were a lot of people on the field that weren't. And not always, but sometimes they didn't get treated great. If you pissed off one of the people on the field and they said, okay, hurt that dude, then that guy got hurt. But I don't want to make this sound like that's all that there was. That probably still exists to some extent today. There was a lot of really good things that were going on too. There were people like Sir Leaf, who was one of the most honorable fighters that I had ever seen on the battlefield, and was also one of the best fighters to ever play our game, hands down. You had a lot of other knights and warlords that came together in the early aughts to start up this little thing called Sword Knight Boot Camp, where they decided to pass on the knowledge that they had gained. And the first one, we drove up to the very first, we didn't even have the 15-passenger van at this point, I don't think. We drove up to Colorado and went to this and got to learn from some of those people. And this was all positive stuff. This was some of the best times in Amtgard. The reason that Oldguard gets thrown around now, I think, is because there's been some huge changes that are going on in the game in the past 5 to 6 years. We have a new knighthood, which I don't think that what's called the Iron Mountain clause has been decided yet, which would be to put Battle Game Knight under sword or keep it as its own separate belt. I
hope it goes under sword, personally.
Oh, see, I want it to stay its own belt.
Oh yeah,
I do. Yeah. But that's been put in. We have the creation of our code of conduct going in, which it might not have been 5 or 6 years ago, but certainly in the whole span of Amtgard is a more recent thing. We have a lot of people coming out that are making reports against some of the people that have been in the game for a long time that got away with things that they shouldn't have gotten away with. The bad elements of that, of what I'll call Oldguard. Yeah. But the thing to take away from here is what I started with. People are people. Good people are going to do good things and bad people are going to do bad things. This isn't even a power corrupts. This is much more of the people that were doing those things were doing them because they actually thought it was fun and funny. And the friends that they were hanging out with actually thought it was fun and funny. You know, they were getting into fights and beating each other up, but they weren't calling the cops on one another. That was how they had fun. And we don't live in that game anymore. I grew up in a game where underage drinking was extremely common, and smoking pot anywhere openly
yeah,
was very, very common. If you do that nowadays, in the majority of the kingdoms that I have visited in recent years, you will at minimum be kicked off the site and probably banned from the kingdom, and possibly have the cops called on you and arrested, or have your parents arrested if you're underage when all of this is going on. People listen to all of those old war stories and go, yeah, I'm going to live that Amtgard life. We don't live in that world anymore. And be thankful that we don't. There's been a lot of quality of life improvements that have gone in. My final thing on Oldguard is this. There are plenty of great things that came out of Oldguard. Oldguard is a lot of the people that are in your kingdom that you still have a lot of respect for today. Be they fighters that have been in the game for a long time, be they serpent knights who are or have produced beautiful things, or whose work you see when another knight is getting knighted and they're presenting some of their work as a knighting gift or something like that. Be they someone that's in leadership who you may not see as much of anymore because they have kind of stepped back and are helping foster this new generation of leaders that are coming in. Base your opinion of Oldguard on that. Stop using it as a derogatory term, because it includes all of those people that are doing those wonderful things as well. And start basing it on, put this on a person-to-person basis. If someone is doing something that you know is bad, or did something that you know was bad and disagreed with, it's not bad because they were Oldguard. It's bad because they were a person that did something that you disagreed with. That's really where I'm at on it.
It's the idea of look at the actions, not necessarily that person. If they were doing these actions now, wouldn't be incorrect because they're new guard. Right? They would be incorrect because their actions are incorrect.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think that is a very good way to look at it, because I think there are a lot of good things that have come out of Oldguard that we are still enjoying and reaping the benefits of, that most of the people who use Oldguard as a pejorative don't fully understand or recognize. Like you're talking about Sword Knight Boot Camp. The code of conduct is still, depending on how about, so one of my squires just hit the 4-year mark in the game. And we had a conversation the other week with new players coming into the park are viewing him like he viewed me and some of the other older players. And he's kind of it doesn't make sense to him, right? Like he goes, well, I'm still a new player. Well, not really, right? The game cycles out every few, 3 to 5 years or whatever. And so these new players are viewing you as one of the veteran players. And how you wield that presumed authority says a lot about you as a player. And so even the code of conduct is now Oldguard, if we're really talking about it, because that was 10 years ago, right? Most players from 10 years ago, so a lot of people are going to call Oldguard now, because that's 3 generations or 2 generations of Amtgarders now that have come and gone. And I think that we are still enjoying a lot of the benefits of Oldguard. So let's eat the meat, spit out the bones, take the things that were great, that we love from it, that we still benefit from, while fully recognizing the faults that were there, and continue on and love our game.
Yeah.